Hi, everyone. See if I can advance my slide. I'm Carmen Tedesco, and I'm the Director for Analytics at Frame. And I want to talk to you and have you all think today about what is possible when we can map humanity. But first, I spent the last 15 or so years working as an international development professional. And in doing that, I was implementing projects all around the world, from the home office and in the field. And I'm a geographer and a geospatial expert. And so as part of that, I was always looking for ways to integrate data into our work to help with our programming and to show impact. And I would start with our home office and look for data there. And then I would go over to a country, and I'd see what does that country offer for data. And oftentimes, I would look to see what was available through international reputable sources like the World Bank Living Standards Measurement Survey or the Demographic Health Survey, the DHS. And then sometimes I would also work with our local field staff to help collect data. And oftentimes we're using mobile devices to collect all kinds of project information with really specific to a region or a sector that our project was working on. And I would often ask and beg, please don't collect anything we don't need. We don't need personally identifiable information, and I sometimes lost that battle. So I want to tell you a specific story about this that really was problematic for me. I was working on a project, and we were collecting data from our participants as good M&E professionals. And one of the things that we were required to collect was their national ID. And this is basically the US equivalent of a social security number. And in addition to that, we were also collecting some pretty sensitive information. And we were collecting things like their children and their ages of their children and the addresses that they lived at and their sexual orientation and whether or not they had been deported from the United States. And we were supposed to hand off all this data, the raw data, without any of the national ID stripped to the national government. And I was super uncomfortable with that. And so we worked through a very long bureaucratic diplomatic process. It delayed the project by months, and we were able to get some compromise on that data. But this is just to let you know where I come from, of like why data privacy became a big deal for me, and the protections and safeguards of data became something that I found it really important. And for all of us in development, I think it's really important that we're getting the most useful data, the most actionable data possible. So as development professionals, we're looking for the most useful information and data that we can give and work with our stakeholders on the ground, or whether they're those government ministries or other partners that are using this for information and decision making. Oftentimes, it's really a proxy for the questions that people really need answers to. And sometimes, if you're data savvy, you can wait a few years and get a census or a DHS, and you can use that data to make those decisions. Or in other cases, you'll have highly specific project information that's really discrete, and it's related to that project that you're working on. And then in some cases, you just don't have data, and you go by subjective decisions that you'll make based on your own experience. You may be working in a project now where you're using census data or DHS data from 2016, and you're making important decisions about COVID or HIV/AIDS or the economic recovery today in 2022. And that's because this is the safe, authoritative data. It's the data that is what's considered proven, even if the timeliness of the data isn't exactly trustworthy, and in the scale of the data may not actually work with what it is that you need to accomplish. Some organizations are really using frontier approaches, but not enough of us. And many are really happy to continue with the status quo. And this is until they're really told to do otherwise. And there are changes afoot. There's policies and guidelines that are coming out, and I really applaud the organizations and the people that are working for that, pushing that data revolution forward and working on the safeguards for that. But there's also the problem of what is spoken about and planned for and designed, and as we always used to say, and then what happens in implementation. And that is the status quo. And frankly, I think a lot of development communities and organizations are still pretty comfortable in that space. So I think we as a community, particularly the technology leaders in development, have an obligation to do a better job of trailblazing. So what could that look like? Today, technology is really advancing the gold standard of the DHS. And it's making it more timely, more actionable, and more effective. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about us at Frame. So we help our partners zoom in to look at anywhere in the world and what people in those places are thinking, how they behave, and what their preferences are at the community level. So we are a technology company, but our DNA is in development. So we acquire the best household data, and then we combine it with satellite imagery and remote sensing to get that really high, effective, timely, census-like data. And you're probably like, well, what does that mean? What is like census-like data? It means that we can look at communities of people across the whole country because we've sampled the entire population. And we take privacy extremely seriously, as you probably heard in my previous comment that I just mentioned. Our goal is privacy by default data. And what that means is we don't collect personally identifiable information, or PII. And this hasn't always been the case. We've learned lessons over time of how to do this more effectively and how to gather the kinds of information that we need without tying a specific piece of data to an individual. And then we use a machine learning approach that allows us to look at that census-like data everywhere. And then this allows us to have built-in security for our data, and it builds in operational efficiencies. It also makes our data less prone to outside influence. We work with trusted partners that are research-oriented and SOMAR partners. And if you're not familiar with SOMAR, this means they're leaders in data privacy and protections and safeguarding. While no one is perfect, we are taking this really seriously because we work with really sensitive populations and data. And a couple examples that we've worked on recently are Syrian refugees and their financial access, or HIV/AIDS, or child marriage. So I'm going to give you a couple examples. The Gates Foundation is working on an advocacy program addressing child marriage. So we're helping them by taking a look at that data. First, examining the status quo. You can see that a stagnant development indicator masks both the progress and the failures happening at the country level. And nationally, in this case, it's basically the same over a 10-year period. And that's what you see in the black box. There's really no change. But communities have up to 25% change in child marriage prevalence. So if you look at the Northeast, there's a large decrease. But if you look in the Northwest and the central areas, there's actually an increase. And what this means is only examining that national data masks all the actual situations that are happening in many of these communities. And by looking at the community level data, you can actually do your programming and decision making that will affect the change that needs to happen. Another example, we're all working with COVID data. We're looking at COVID and its impacts. We want to know, how is it affecting communities? Why are some communities vaccine hesitant? And what is blocking people from vaccines? And how do we address that? The status quo is that we would use older census data. And we would look at proxies like childhood immunization and combine that with other health indicators. We may even look at other suggestions, like organizations that address data from the gig economy, where they're getting snapshot information from individuals to get a sense for their opinions and their thoughts and feelings and what they look like. If you're looking for a discrete group of people, like adult males between the ages of 24 and 35 that live in an urban setting and have a smartphone, then that could be really useful. But if you are a government official and you want to know the span of COVID across your country and where the hotspots are and where we need to focus resources, you want to develop a social behavior change campaign, then you really need data that's up to date. And this is where I think that we can do better. So I want to tell you a little bit about Frame. So at Frame, we are able to provide data at scale that is nationally representative. And that means we can look at communities of people across a whole country because we use samples that can provide data on the entire population. So think back to that DHS example that I gave you where we were waiting on it for a couple of years. We now live in a world where it's possible to achieve that type of data in a matter of months, and it can be refreshed regularly. You can ask the questions that you're familiar with. Have you had the COVID-19 vaccine? Are you planning to get a COVID-19 vaccine? Or in this case, from a couple of months ago from South Africa, we asked, have you lost income due to COVID? While this data has traditionally been displayed, it's older and it's not very timely. If you're lucky, you could get it at the subnational level. It is now timely and actionable at a scale that is obtainable. We can also combine a series of questions to understand if people are getting vaccinated, and if not, why. And then locate hotspots and understand, is it huge cost barriers or complacency? Or is it because of mis or disinformation about the vaccine? We can examine barriers to health access, income, job, access to health centers. And we can tell you where the people are that are vaccine hesitant, why they are vaccine hesitant, and which channels to use to drive home the message to address their why. We can move the needle on shots in arms. And we're not just moving that needle. We're doing this across any sector that has indicators related to people. This is where we're at now. And while data has traditionally been very siloed, Frame offers a horizontal solution to looking at data. So I want to leave you with the thought that the data revolution is here. It's our responsibility as development leaders to inspire others to what is possible and to transcend our use of data and shift the status quo. Thanks.